Okay, so the topic that I chose was Punjab's deforestation, and I picked that because I'm not only from there, but I'm kind of aware of the environmental issues with the recent protests going on. So I just wanted to see how that ties into deforestations and broader environmental policy. And then the second part of this is the machine learning solutions. So this semester, it's been an interest of mine to see how machine learning solutions can solve or predict deforestation. So overall, the infrastructure deployment in India and Punjab is really relegated to the private contractor. And really, the deforestation that's been happening over the last 20 years or so is resulting in natural resource destruction and species destruction, where we're losing 30,000 a year, which is the quickest rate in the last 65 million years. So this is some of what the politics is going on. CAMPA, which is the Compensatory Afforestation Fund Management Planning Authority, has been using their funds dishonestly and misrepresenting how much and what spending is going where. Additionally, the Executive Engineer Central turned in sketchy compliance documents on what constitutes satisfactory clearance conditions. So these are what Amandeep Agarwal, the Chairman, Action Committee on Legal Self of the Indian Medical Association, describes as the current climate as it comes to deforestation. So this ties in with the specific protests that have been going on, and there's been an occupation of the capital, and this has been documented in pretty much all global news. We've also seen these protests touch home in California, where a lot of the Sikh community is out and protesting. But really, what this shows from a policy perspective is that three things, and these extend to deforestations and the overall environmental attitude of India and the laws that they're passing down to Punjab. So one of them is that there's a favoring of economic policy over environmental sustainability, which is the continuation of this separation between their drive to create infrastructure and the environment. So they don't see the two going hand in hand. So number two is that laws that prioritize social economic policy, which ignores the fundamental industries that the country runs on, like farming in this case, which we'll see later on relies heavily on forestation. So they prioritize social economic policy that ignores the fundamental industries in a manner that marginalizes the poor of the country, all in order to try to create a globally competitive economy, which India's been doing for, I think, the last 20 to 30 years, but they're minimizing their own backbone of industry, and really it hits the poor the hardest. And the third kind of issue that I've highlighted here is that the lack of understanding that progress to develop infrastructure doesn't just go hand in hand with environmental practices, but really it is the backbone of what a sustainable infrastructure should be itself. So those three are key here. So here we have some events and initiatives, policy acts that they have over the last 30 years are documented, and really the most impressive is the Green Punjab mission, which in 2012 was to put 190 crores, which is a figure of their currency rupees, and they've tried to plant 400 million trees. So there are initiatives and policy being taken, as we can see documented here over the last 30 years, but it all comes back to this is a canopy map specifically of the Pakistan portion of Punjab. There's an India portion as well. So we see here that there's -5 kilometers of the closed canopy species and -2 in the private area. So the same reductions in the species right here also occurs in the state and the privately managed area. Overall, Punjab has a northern dry mixed deciduous forest, and these are the species here. So the key players, we already talked about CAMPA and the pollution department, but there's civil society groups that have been trying to bring awareness of the environmental damages through cases filed to the Supreme Court, and then there's just listed some more of those that are involved in the preservation and deforestation. So as far as insights, the Riley and Gardner peer-reviewed article on examining the distributional equity of urban tree canopy across United States cities was, as they said, one of the studies that looked at larger patterns of socioeconomic and environmental variability. So not only was that a study that stood out for them, but really it stood out and informed my curiosity with the relation between the environment and the socioeconomic locations that had access to environmental amenities, quote unquote. So this kind of informed my lens of analyzing this case particular study, where we looked at both India and Pakistan sections of Punjab, and specifically the key players and their driving interest in the private and public sector. So to be honest, on a broader level, it's rampant corruption that's present in really all establishments, not just the environmental industry, but all industry altogether. There's corruption, and that's kind of well documented, well known. So other than trying to get honest people into these positions of power, there really has to be new standards for holding people accountable, and there should be new standards to be transparent really with the grants and money, because that's a systemic problem in all industry about where the money is going. And then finally, and most importantly, as we touched on before, there needs to be an equal or more value placed on the protection and advancement of ecology and environmental practices as there is on development of infrastructure. So the path forward, there are organizations like the Rainforest Connections, which use an interesting blend of old and new technology. For example, they have old cell phones that are kind of scattered in the forest setting to build a continuous audio recording, which then could be converted into data and put into platforms like TensorFlow, where then they could take that data and build predictive algorithms to detect like the location and migration patterns for specific species or animals. Those systems can also detect sound-based, illegal activities such as tree cutting or wood trucks in areas where they shouldn't be. In application, there are limitations to these devices. So I talked about the cell phones before. They don't have the capacity to deploy algorithms on the cell phones. And then secondly, they're able to detect louder noises in this continuous audio recording, but they're not sensitive to the quieter frequencies of animals slash species that we're interested in studying. And then the next thing is really that there's a lack of programmers in the field, specifically with environmental science, and there's also a lack of funding because most of these efforts are nonprofit. So the path forward, in terms of the machine learning aspect of what I was trying to tie in here was that there's, first of all, to define what machine learning is, it's a branch of AI, which is where you optimize and set the constraints and then let the computer train, quote unquote, the models. So that although it's suggested that these machine learning practices are better than just simple statistical analysis, the complexity costs are something always to be weighed. So I was able to just look into some studies, and really the four prominent techniques of modeling are Bayesian networks, artificial neural networks, and then Gaussian processes and generalized linear mixed models. So I've just included a chart of the accuracies, the design decisions, the objectives, and the data availability, which have been in this particular study tailored for predicting deforestation methods. So I would, had time permitting, gotten into this more, but nevertheless, it's pretty interesting things to study. So, yep.